Welcome to silent screams, where darkness, whispers, and terror await you. Are you ready to confront your fears? Story 1: The Doll in the Attic. Sarah had never expected to inherit her grandmother's house. It had been years since she visited the old Victorian manor, which had always been filled with oddities and memories that never seemed to fit together. But now, with her grandmother's passing, the house and all its contents were hers. The first day of moving in felt like a dream: long, dusty halls, peeling wallpaper, and strange paintings on the walls. Among the inherited belongings was a small, unsettling box tucked in the back of the attic. The box contained a porcelain doll, its face painted with an unnerving smile and eyes that seemed to follow Sarah wherever she went. Despite its disheveled appearance, there was an odd pull to it, like it was calling to her. As Sarah cleaned the attic, she couldn't shake the feeling that the doll was different. The air in the room seemed to change when she looked at it. That night, Sarah placed the doll in a corner of her bedroom, thinking it would make for an interesting conversation piece. She laughed it off, but something gnawed at her as she lay in bed, hearing faint creaks in the floorboards. Over the next few days, Sarah started noticing strange occurrences. She would wake up to find the doll in different positions. One morning, it was sitting on her pillow; another time, it was at the foot of her bed, eyes wide open. It was always positioned just slightly out of place, as if it was watching her. Then the nightmares began. At first, it was a feeling of being watched, shadows darting across her vision as she tried to sleep. But soon, the dreams grew darker. Sarah dreamed of a young girl, her face pale and expressionless, clutching the same doll. The girl's voice echoed through Sarah's mind, pleading for help. But the words were lost in a whisper too soft to understand. One night, Sarah awoke to the sound of soft footsteps outside her door. Her heart raced as she approached the door, expecting to see nothing. But when she opened it, there was a chill in the air, and the doll was gone. The more Sarah researched her grandmother's past, the more she uncovered disturbing details. It turned out that her grandmother had been obsessed with collecting antique dolls, many of which were rumored to be haunted. One doll, in particular, stood out: a porcelain doll with dark, lifelike eyes, the one Sarah had inherited. Sarah learned from old family records that the doll was once owned by a girl named Evelyn, who had lived in the house decades before. Evelyn had vanished mysteriously when she was just 12 years old, and the doll was the last thing she had been seen holding. Rumors of its dark powers circulated in the town, whispers that the doll could trap the souls of those who became too attached to it. As Sarah dug deeper, she discovered a journal hidden in the attic, written by her grandmother. It detailed the strange events that had unfolded after she first brought the doll into the house. Her grandmother had experienced the same disturbances: disembodied whispers, objects moving on their own, and the feeling of being constantly watched. The journal ended abruptly, with her grandmother writing, "I can't escape it. It knows me." The doll's influence on Sarah grew stronger. She began losing track of time, waking up in strange places within the house, her mind hazy. One morning, she discovered strange symbols scratched into the walls, symbols she did not remember making. The whispers in the dark grew louder, now accompanied by a soft, haunting lullaby. One night, Sarah awoke to find herself standing in front of a mirror, her reflection grinning back at her with an unnatural expression. She could feel the presence of something behind her. But when she turned around, there was only the doll, now standing upright in the middle of the room. In a desperate bid to rid herself of the doll, Sarah decided to burn it. She placed the doll in the fireplace, lit the match, and watched as the flames devoured its porcelain body. But instead of burning away, the flames seemed to distort, twisting into a shape that resembled the doll. The room was filled with an overwhelming sense of dread, and the whispers escalated into shrill cries of agony. In the chaos, Sarah realized the truth: the doll had not been a mere object. It was a vessel, a conduit for the trapped soul of Evelyn. The girl's spirit had never left, bound to the doll by an ancient curse. The only way to stop it was to confront the spirit and free her from the doll's grip. But Sarah wasn't sure if she had the strength to do so. In a final moment of clarity, Sarah screamed at the doll, begging Evelyn to let go. The room shook, and for a fleeting moment, the girl's face appeared in the flames, her expression twisted in rage, but also in sorrow. Then, with a final, ear-splitting cry, the doll shattered, its pieces falling to the ground. The morning after the doll's destruction, Sarah woke up to find the house eerily silent. The whispers were gone. There were no more strange occurrences. But as Sarah sat in the now peaceful attic, staring at the remains of the doll, she realized something unsettling. A small piece of porcelain, untouched by the flames, lay in her hand. It was part of the doll's face, a faint, knowing smile etched into the fragment. The house felt empty now, but Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that the doll's curse still lingered, waiting for someone else to find it. The ending leaves readers with a sense of unresolved dread. Sarah may have destroyed the doll, but it's unclear whether the spirit of Evelyn is truly gone. The doll, it seems, was only a part of something far darker, and it could find its way back into the world at any time. Story 2: The Doll That Calls Your Name. I had always hated dolls. Even as a child, I could never understand why people thought they were cute. Their glassy eyes staring into the distance, their stiff, motionless bodies, it all felt wrong. But when my grandmother passed away and left me her house, I couldn't help but feel a strange obligation to visit the place where I had spent so many summers. It was old, dusty, and filled with memories. But what caught my attention the most were the dolls, dozens of them, scattered across every room, their glass eyes following me wherever I went. I tried to ignore them as best as I could, even after I found a small, intricately carved wooden doll in the attic. It was like nothing I had ever seen before. Unlike the others, this doll seemed different. Its porcelain face was cracked, the eyes slightly too wide, and the mouth formed a strange, almost imperceptible smile. It felt alive, like it was waiting for something. But I didn't think much of it at the time. After all, it was just a doll. That night, as I lay in bed in the old, creaking house, I heard it. A faint whisper. A voice, low and distorted, coming from the direction of the attic. "Come to me." I froze. My heart raced as I stared into the darkness. Surely, it was just the house settling, I told myself. But then, I heard it again, closer this time. It wasn't my imagination. The voice was calling my name. I was terrified, but my curiosity got the better of me. I grabbed a flashlight and made my way up to the attic, my breath catching in my throat with each step. The air was thick with dust, and the dolls were still there, staring at me from the corners of the room. But the strange wooden doll was no longer on the shelf where I had left it. I could feel its presence behind me. A chill creeping up my spine as if it were standing just inches away. And then I heard it again. "Come to me." I spun around. But nothing was there, nothing except the doll. Now sitting on the floor. Its porcelain eyes gleaming in the flashlight's beam. My hand shook as I reached down to pick it up. But the moment my fingers brushed the doll's smooth surface, I felt a sharp, cold sensation pierce through my body. The whispers stopped. For a moment, everything was silent. And then, in the reflection of the flashlight, I saw it. The doll's mouth began to move. Just slightly. As if it was trying to form words. "Help me." My blood ran cold. The next few days were a blur of unease. I tried to tell myself it was all in my head. That the doll had some sort of mechanical mechanism in its mouth. And I had just imagined the whispers. But every night, the voices grew louder. More insistent. "Come to me. Help me." And no matter how hard I tried to ignore them, I couldn't. I decided to investigate the history of the doll. The more I searched, the more I uncovered. The doll had been part of a collection my grandmother had bought many years ago from an antique store. The store, it seemed, was no longer in business. But I managed to find a few old articles online that hinted at something dark, something sinister about the dolls. The shop had been owned by a woman named Evelyn Darkmore, a collector of rare and ancient artifacts. It was rumored that she had dabbled in the occult, using her dolls to channel spirits from beyond the grave. The stories varied. Some said she had cursed them, others claimed she used them to trap souls, forcing them to remain inside the porcelain bodies forever. I felt a chill run down my spine as I realized that my grandmother's collection wasn't just a collection of dolls. They were prisons. And the one that called me was the key. I had to know more. I found an old journal of Evelyn's, buried deep in the attic's crawlspace. The entries were frantic, filled with scribbles and warnings. One stood out. The dolls are not just toys. They are vessels, holding something far darker than I ever imagined. If you hear them whisper your name, don't listen. If you hear them calling you, run. Run far away. You cannot escape them. It was too late. I could feel the doll's eyes on me, always watching, waiting. And every night, its whispers grew stronger. The nights became unbearable. The doll no longer just whispered. It moved. I woke up one morning to find it sitting at the foot of my bed, its head tilted at an unnatural angle. I tried to leave the house, but every time I stepped outside, the air seemed to grow heavier, the sky darker. The doll was with me. Always. I reached out to a paranormal investigator, desperate for help. He arrived with his equipment. A skeptic at first. But as soon as he entered the house, he began to sweat. His face turned pale. "The dolls," he whispered. "They're all wrong." He placed a recorder near the doll, hoping to capture any paranormal activity. When he played it back, the room fell silent, save for a low, guttural growl, followed by my name, clear as day. "Come to me." The investigator backed away, his eyes wide with terror. "You've awakened something, something ancient." The night was coming. I knew what I had to do. I had to destroy the doll. But when I went to the attic, the dolls were no longer there. Every one of them, every single one, was standing in the shadows, facing me. Their eyes glinted in the dim light. and the room began to feel suffocating. The wooden doll appeared before me. Its cracked porcelain face now smiling wickedly. The air grew colder as I reached for it, determined to break the curse once and for all. But as my fingers brushed against it, I felt a sharp, searing pain in my chest. "Help me," the doll whispered, its mouth stretching wide in a grotesque grin. "You can't escape. You never could." The last thing I remember was the cold, hollow laughter echoing in my ears as I fell to the floor. The room, the dolls, everything around me, faded into darkness. The house was abandoned after I disappeared. No one ever came to search for me. The dolls, still as lifeless as ever, sat in their silent vigil, waiting for the next soul to fall into their trap. Some say that if you listen carefully, on quiet nights, you can hear a faint whisper in the air, a voice calling your name, beckoning you toward the attic. And if you're unlucky enough to answer, you might just find yourself trapped inside one of the dolls, your soul bound forever to its porcelain prison. Story 3: The Doll's Lullaby. It all started with a simple curiosity. The antique shop on the corner of Elm and 5th Street had always piqued Anna's interest. A small, dusty shop filled with forgotten relics and items that seemed to whisper secrets from another time. But it was the dolls that called to her. Old porcelain faces stared back at her through the grimy windows, their glass eyes gleaming in the dim light. Some were cracked, others discolored with age. But there was one that stood out, a doll with golden curls and a worn velvet dress. Its eyes, though chipped, held an unsettling gleam, as if they could see right through her. There was something about it that drew her in, despite the warning in the back of her mind. She entered the shop. The air was thick with dust, and the smell of old wood and mildew clung to her skin. The bell above the door jingled as she stepped inside, and an elderly man with a stooped back appeared from the shadows. "Can I help you, miss?" he asked in a gravelly voice, his eyes hidden behind thick spectacles. Anna nodded toward the doll. "How much for this one?" The man's eyes darkened, and he looked at her with an unreadable expression. "Not for sale," he said curtly. "That doll, it has a history. You wouldn't want it." Anna hesitated, but curiosity gnawed at her. "What kind of history?" The man's gaze dropped to the floor. "That doll has been passed down for generations. Each owner, well, none of them ever kept it for long." Anna chuckled nervously, dismissing the old man's words. "I'm sure it's just a story. I'll take it." The man sighed deeply but didn't argue further. With trembling hands, he wrapped the doll in faded newspaper and handed it over. As Anna left the shop, she couldn't shake the feeling that she had made a grave mistake. That night, as she sat on her bed admiring her new possession, a cold chill filled the room. The doll's eyes seemed to follow her every movement. She laughed it off, placing it on her nightstand before turning off the light and drifting into an uneasy sleep. The first incident came the following evening. Anna was brushing her hair in front of the mirror when she heard a soft sound, a faint lullaby drifting from the corner of the room. At first, she thought it was the wind, but the melody was too distinct, too human. She turned toward the nightstand where the doll sat, its porcelain face almost glowing in the dim light. The music grew louder. Anna's heart raced. She stood frozen, her hand gripping the edge of the dresser. It was coming from the doll. She slowly approached it, her breath catching in her throat as the doll's eyes shifted. Just for a second, she swore they moved. But that was impossible. Right? The lullaby stopped abruptly, replaced by the soft sound of breathing. Anna looked around, her pulse quickening. Was it just her imagination? She couldn't shake the feeling that someone, was in the room with her. She glanced at the doll once more and nearly screamed. The doll's lips, they were moving. Over the next few days, things only grew worse. The lullaby would play randomly, and the doll would change positions when she wasn't looking. It was subtle at first, its head tilted slightly, its hands placed differently, but it soon became impossible to ignore. Anna tried to throw the doll away, but each time she did, it would appear back on her nightstand, as though it had never been moved. She even called the antique shop, hoping the man would take it back. But when she reached him, the phone line crackled with static, and a voice, faint and distorted, whispered, "It's already too late." One evening, Anna invited her best friend, Clara, over, hoping she could offer some comfort. But the moment Clara stepped inside, the atmosphere in the room shifted. It felt heavy, like a storm was on the horizon. "What's wrong, Anna?" Clara asked, her eyes flicking nervously to the doll. It's this doll," Anna whispered. It's alive." Clara laughed nervously, though there was a hint of unease in her voice. "You've been under a lot of stress lately. Maybe it's just your imagination." But as the words left Clara's mouth, the lullaby began again, sweet and haunting, echoing through the room. Clara's face went pale. "What the hell is that?" "I don't know," Anna replied, trembling. "But I can't get rid of it." Clara backed away slowly, her gaze fixed on the doll. "You need to burn it," she said urgently. "This isn't normal. Whatever is in that doll, it's evil." But before they could act, a sudden crash echoed from the corner of the room. The doll had fallen off the nightstand and was now lying face down on the floor. As Anna rushed to pick it up, her fingers brushed against the cold porcelain, and something strange happened. The doll's eyes flashed, glowed, and the room seemed to tilt. Anna's mind was unraveling. She couldn't escape it. The doll had cursed her, and now it had begun to take control. The eerie lullaby played louder each night, and Anna could feel its presence, its malice, grow stronger. It was as though something was watching her, waiting for the right moment to strike. Her dreams were no better. She dreamed of a child, her face pale and twisted, standing by the doll's side, whispering words Anna couldn't understand. The girl's eyes, black and empty, stared into Anna's soul. And in those dreams, Anna felt herself sinking into the doll's world, her body paralyzed as if the doll was slowly draining the life out of her. Desperate for answers, Anna returned to the antique shop. This time, the man was waiting for her, his expression grim. "You shouldn't have taken it," he said, his voice trembling. "The doll is cursed, and it feeds on the souls of those who keep it." "But why?" Anna asked, almost pleading. "Why me? What do I do?" The man sighed, his hands shaking. "There's nothing you can do. The doll's curse is ancient. You must destroy it. But be warned, once you disturb it, it will never let you go." Anna felt a chill run down her spine. "Destroy it?" The man nodded gravely. "The doll has taken its victims for over 100 years. If you don't break the curse, it will claim you too." That night, Anna prepared to burn the doll. She had to end it. But as she gathered matches and oil, the doll began to laugh. A low, hollow laugh. Like the sound of a child's voice twisted by years of torment. Suddenly, the room grew cold. The walls seemed to pulse. And the doll's eyes shone brightly. Anna stood frozen, unable to move. As the doll began to rise from the floor, she tried to scream, but her voice was caught in her throat. The doll reached for her, its porcelain fingers outstretched. And Anna felt a sharp pain shoot through her chest. It was as if the doll had pierced her soul. And then, everything went black. Days passed before anyone found Anna. When they did, they found her lying lifeless on the floor, her eyes wide open, staring at the doll, which now sat quietly on the nightstand. The shopkeeper, upon hearing of her death, went to retrieve the doll. But when he opened the door, he found it gone.